Hey, I'm back with another Meditation Amsterdam video where we talk about things related to mind and body meditation, mindfulness, coaching, and Amsterdam. So, believe it or not, this is the fourth time I do this video, and I've never struggled with a topic so much. I don't know what it is about this one. I think it's the fact that I'm trying to have a go at psychology or psychoanalysis, and it's a bit of maybe a negative topic. And probably the fact that I don't know that much about psychoanalysis to begin with. So I'll stick to what I know and try to describe what in my mind is the core issue with psychoanalysis as an approach to deep and lasting personal transformation. And so in essence, what it comes down to is the notion that psychoanalysis is an idea created by the thinking mind to resolve the problems of the thinking mind. And when you take meditation and breath work and those kind of practices, those are practices that are based on principles which transcend the thinking mind, so that they circumvent the alloplastic defenses, and we can get into what that means, of the thinking mind. Another way to do that is hypnosis, by the way. So alloplastic defenses are defense mechanisms that our personality has in order to stay in place so that we can protect ourselves and our boundaries. They can be very useful, of course, in that sense, but they can be very unhandy when you're trying to affect deep personality changes in yourself, because you're trying to make a change whilst the ego is trying to preserve itself. And so it'll put up all kinds of resistances and stories and unpleasant feelings and emotions to keep that homeostasis in place, to keep you stuck where you are, so to speak. And so we have, for example, hypnosis to try to get around those, right? So we put you in a highly hypnotized and distracted state in which the conscious mind is looking at the birdie, while something else is subliminal messages are going under its radar, straight into the subconscious mind. It's a fairly crude and I don't like it as a modality of healing, because of what I know about mindful awareness, which is that's the real juice, right? A high degree of mindful awareness is the real recipe for affecting lasting change. And it also puts you in charge as a subject. So essentially, what's going on with the psychoanalytical approach is that it is analytical. That's part of the problem. It is part of the mechanics of the thinking mind, and it doesn't go beyond it. And I was talking to a coachee the other day, and she was telling me how a certain person that she works with is helping her to explore certain Freudian elements of her personality to try to understand rejection issues and things of that kind. And my first reaction to that was that that can be just an endless rabbit hole. You could spend your whole life analyzing your personality and your ego and its issues and trying to resolve them by analyzing them more and more. Now, if that sounds familiar to you as part of the general problem, is because it is part of the general problem. See, part of our problem and part of our thinking mode going off the rails is that we end up overthinking and going into these rabbit holes of overthinking, trying to overanalyze. And the story that we tell ourselves, and the story that psychoanalysis tells itself as a discipline in its pure form, is that if you only analyze things deep enough and comprehensively enough, you'll get to the bottom of it, and that'll make the problem resolve itself. But how does that work out with every other problem? I mean, other than problems in the external world, which require a lot of analysis, and you could, get to the data if you're lucky, right? And then make clear-cut determinations about going left or right. Your inner world is not like that. It is not subject it is subject to analysis, but it is endless because the psyche is endless. There's infinities in the mind, right? So you'll never hit bedrock. You'll constantly attempt to get to the bottom of your psychological problem, and once you think you got it, there's always something in your mind that could go, well, on the other hand, and off you go again on another rant, endless rant. Or you could say, well, that's true, but it doesn't feel that way, and therefore, problem unresolved, right? So your hang-ups, your phobias, your recurring negative patterns are very, very likely to be unresolved if you only take this psychoanalytical approach. There needs to be an embodied approach, and there needs to be an approach that circumvents thinking altogether, but that keeps you on a high degree of mindful awareness. That's where I got some paint on me on a rail out in the street. That's the problem with hypnosis. Hypnosis goes under the radar of the thinking mind, but then you're also mindless while it's happening, right? Whereas mindfulness practices and mind-body integration also circumvents the thinking mind, but it is not taking you below thinking in the way that alcohol would, or hypnosis, but it takes you above the thinking mind, so that you still bypass it, but you are fully awake and aware while doing it. So you can guide the process, and you use the light of awareness to open up areas that could not be opened up before. So in essence, that is the core of the message. Now, I think that there's a lot to be learned about the human psyche, to be sure, right? So maybe as a diagnostic tool, in order to assess what is this dysfunction that we're dealing with, psychoanalysis could have a lot of value. I think, I don't know if there's a lot of Freudian people still out there, thinking that everything is about sex and your parents. Personally, I've read a little bit about Jung, and I'm utterly impressed with the way he looked at the archetypes. And given that I'm also a Tai Chi practitioner, I have realized that the way you carry yourself and your structure, your bodily structure, unlocks certain archetypal behaviors, right? So that using your body to embody the archetypes that you want is a great tactic, right? It's a great technique, by all means. In order to remember to do so, you still need mindful awareness, right? So we land back on, so mindful awareness is the bedrock of pretty much everything, as a matter of fact, right? Everything and no thing that is out there and in here, it all comes down to consciousness. It comes down to what is your degree of mindful awareness. You could almost argue that you can even make psychoanalytical tools work if your mindful awareness is switched on enough, if your level of mindful awareness is high enough, so that you're bringing that real juice into the mix, as opposed to just a clinical, analytical approach that goes into the content of the mind. So let's go into that content element as well, right? So we talk about how the mechanics of analysis are a poor tool to resolve the thinker in the mind, because they both use the same mechanic. So part of the issue there, to see it from a bit of a different angle, is the idea of getting caught in analyzing the content of the mind, as opposed to getting to the very pattern that creates that dysfunction in the first place, right? So you could say that you need to go meta, or analyze from outside as much as you can, to get to the root cause of things and to the highest causal order, so that the first cause from which you can affect all the ones underneath. So that, for example, if you're dealing with a phobia of computers, let's make something up on the fly. So there's a phobia of computers. Now you could get lost in the content of, but why are you afraid of computers? What do you feel, and what about them, and what do you think caused it? And was it about your parents, or is it the miracle child archetype or whatever? You could go into that, right? Or you could take one step above that and you go, okay, well, here's a phobia about computers. But what if we saw it just as a general phobia, and we treat it the way we do on the principles that would cure any phobia, not just computer phobias, but any generic phobia, because you've distilled the elements that make phobias what they are. So now you're acting at a higher causal level, because you are taking the generic elements and then you're addressing them there. But what is a higher causal level than that? So phobias, you could classify them under all mental symptoms or disorders that have to do with fear, for example, right? Like with tangible panic and intense fear. Okay, very good. So now we're on the level of panic attacks. We're on the level of generalized anxiety syndrome. We are on the level of phobias, which are more sort of focused on specific elements or situations. And so we've taken a meta approach there, and now we have principles that deal with intense bodily fear as a general element, right? And then you're like, well, that's very good. And what would be the upper level to that? And on you go, right? So you go higher and higher and higher every time, up until you get to the point where you're not even dealing with a human being anymore. You are dealing with a mind-body system. And that's where the yogis come in, right? They realize that what we call a human being, with their hang-ups and their memories and their whatevers, is simply a complex system. It's a system of interacting elements. I don't want to call them parts because it sounds too mechanistic, and it is definitely not mechanistic. And they realize that one of the best ways to get that system to function properly is if those parts work very tightly connected with one another, and therefore speaking to one another, and therefore coming up with joint decision making, so to speak, that is truly collaborative, as opposed to a debate in which your heart and your mind are trying to dash it out. And that they, in a sense, are less of a committee and more of a flock of birds or a school of fish. So it's a self-regulating, intrinsically smart organism that enters flow, right? So that's as far from psychoanalysis as you can possibly get, as a matter of fact. It's just like you couldn't get any further than that, because psychoanalysis is about analyzing things. It's linear, yeah? It's one-dimensional in that sense. No matter what complexity it dives into, it's still trying to dissect things with logic, right? And to understand them on a logical level. Whilst integrative, or I heard the word holistic, mind-body practices, they take the individual as a system that needs to learn how to, first of all, recognize itself, as opposed to being hypnotized by its own content of emotions and memories and things like that. And once it becomes transparent to itself, it can start to integrate itself and then regulate itself, right? That's the progression that it needs to make. So I have to say, I'm finally happy with the way that's been phrased. That's the essence of why the psychoanalytical approach is something that might be good for diagnosis, because the disorders of the mind seem to take specific patterns, actually, that have been in fact classified, right? So you could say, like, okay, this is a disorder type, it's like a type B personality disorder, cluster B, whatever, narcissistic with sociopathic tendencies, blah 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 blah. Right, so you can classify that, and then that could still inform how you tailor your approach towards that system, and finding a way to help it regulate, right? Certainly, absolutely. But it is one thing to have a diagnostic tool, and it's another one to have a prognostic tool that tells you whether, what are your chances and how things are going to go, and to have it be the treatment proper to get you out of the situation. Freud was the first to admit that he'd never cured a damn thing. He never really helped anybody, right? And to much of his chagrin, Jung, from what I hear, had the same problem. Great at diagnosing things, great at understanding the patterns of mind, the archetypes, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. could not solve the situation from that level. And so I think it is I would say advised that we understand psychoanalysis for what it's worth. I think it has interesting content to be sure. I think it might be a very good diagnostic tool for mental disorders, but certainly not a good cure or a good system for resolving them. And even the prognosis. I mean, I've seen videos online about narcissism and things of this kind. And to this day, psychoanalytics, the psychological approach, and every self-declared uber expert on what narcissism is can't cure it. They're throwing the hands up and they're saying this is a system that has gone so far beyond where it needs to be. It's useless, right? It's gone. Now, I'm a little bit divided about it. I think it would be very, I think it would be ironically narcissistic of me to say that I would be the one who knows how to cure narcissism, but I would venture to say I have a few ideas about it, and it could be that they could be put into practical use given the right circumstances or the right setting. On the other hand, narcissism could be a problem that can be very, very well understood, but indeed not solved. Just like you could the answer, for example, to how many birds are in flight right now in the world is a very simple answer, actually. It's just a digit, right? Very simple. But the practicalities of finding out are just impossible, right? You can't make it happen. So it could be on that level indeed. There may be such a thing as a system that has sealed itself from help. Cults and extreme religious could be quoted as such a system because it kind of inoculates itself from the inside out to outside influence that is not in line with what it's trying to demonstrate to itself. So everything just feeds the same story, right? It becomes a system in a complete dysfunctional loop out of which it can't be knocked. I don't know. Could be such a thing. Well, that would be that, right? So the individual's desire for transformation might be an inherent condition that you need for that transformation to take place, even if you have the right tools to do so. There you have it. That was my take on psychoanalysis, why I think it is not a tool for transformation, although it might be a tool for diagnosis and understanding the intricacies of the mind. And perhaps the body, or their connection, but that for lasting and effective identity level transformation, you need tools that deal with mind body as a system, and don't get caught up in the contents of the dysfunction or an analytical approach in which you get to the bottom of things and really understand them by classifying them and dissecting them and then thinking about them and giving them a name and stuff like that, because the analytical quality of the mind is not the one you need to transform yourself, and because thinking is in fact part of the dysfunction, and it can be an endless rabbit hole down which you go and never really come out resolved out the other end. So that's my thought about this kind of stuff. I hope it brings some good info to the topic, and I'll be back with more content later on. Bye.